Welcome to the Leaders Agenda, a podcast series dedicated to reimagining leadership within life sciences. My name is Tarja Huuskonen, and I am your host as well as the CEO of Action for Results. I've had the opportunity to work with leaders all over the world, building new capabilities for innovation. The Leaders Agenda podcast invites insights and perspectives from some of the very best leaders of our time. Wisdom that you too can build into your own leaders' agenda. Today's guest is Miyoung Chun, the co-founder and CEO of Alzheimer's X, and also someone who often is credited for igniting the BRAIN initiative, which you'll hear quite a bit more about. What's very special about Miyoung as a leader is that she takes on complex problems and finds solutions. She finds solutions not because she works on her own, but because she has the ability and courage to bring people together, the best scientific minds, the best leaders, the best influencers, and make change happen. Here's Miyoung. Miyoung, thank you so much for joining the Leaders Agenda today. Every time that I meet you and speak with you, I learn something new. So I would like to perhaps ask you to just talk a little bit about yourself first. And I always have that important question on how you describe yourself, not just by the way of the resume, but who is Miyoung?
Ooh. I'm more, I think, accustomed to describing myself with my career path, so why don't we begin with that one first? So I had somewhat unusual career path so far. It spans between academia, industry, and philanthropy. I began my career as a professor at Boston University School of Medicine in biochemistry department, teaching cell biology and molecular medicine and doing research on those topics. And then ended up working at the biotech company. This was a time when the Genome Project was national initiative, and this was the very first functional genomics company called Millennium Pharmaceuticals. There, I did research to find novel genes and making those novel genes function in things that are related to cardiovascular or cancer-related diseases. Ended up having some 30 patents, which I'm very proud of.
Congratulations.
And then came back to academia about a couple of years at UC Santa Barbara as an administrator of the university, and then took a position at philanthropy at the foundation which supported sciences in astrophysics, nanoscience, and neuroscience. I mean, this fit really well with my scientific background because I began my training in physics, but then I ended up having my PhD in molecular genetics. So I was an executive vice president for the foundation. It's called Kavli Foundation for about 10 years. And my most recent endeavor now is I co-founded an organization called Alzheimer's X. It's a think tank organization co-founded by three very disparate experts. Myself, very world-renowned Alzheimer's expert Ken Kasich, and most importantly, actually, this whole endeavor began by finance professor at Sloan Management School at MIT, Andrew Lo, mainly because Alzheimer's disease, on one hand, there are many patients without any treatment, not to mention cure, but also its impact in economic burden is tremendous. Yes. And so he was the one who approached us, and we are seeking to reconfigure how we develop drugs in Alzheimer's field, hoping that we can get out of Alzheimer's crisis.
That is amazing, and I want to actually circle back to that conversation a little bit later, because how you described your own organization there as a think tank, which actually says something about the approach. So we'll come back to that. Would you consider yourself more as a scientist or a leader, an integrator? What's sort of the common theme that comes across your career as you think about just what has been driving you?
Well, I mean, first, identity-wise, I would like to think that I am a mother, grandmother, and a wife, and a daughter. I think that those are most important aspects of who I am. And then career-wise, I think that I am really well-trained scientist, both in life science as well as physical science. But I would think that I am very much of an organizer, connector of all different disparate experts, because I understand different industry sectors as well as knowledge base of different groups. And so I think that I have become, in certain ways, it's not too different from what I do in my family.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. All different people's activities. And so that's, in certain ways, it's a very natural thing that I do.
Yes, yeah. Well, I love that you're saying that. And I ask that question right now for a very good reason, because my own view of your career is very much that you have been able to influence incredible change. And that takes a very certain type of a person who can make the connections themselves, but also are able to help others make those same connections. So one of those very important things to mention here on that note is that you are considered as quite an instrumental force for launching the BRAIN initiative. And of course, the BRAIN initiative is something that started quite a while back. So would you be kind enough and just give us a little bit of a background as to what is the BRAIN initiative, and then we'll look at the history of it a little more.
So the BRAIN initiative is actually acronym. It's Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies. So it's a national initiative announced by President Obama in April 2013. The idea is that if you look at diseases of brain, whether it's neurodegenerative diseases or so many mental health diseases, when you compare 50 years ago and today, it's not too different. We are still not having much treatment, not to mention any cures. I mean, great example is Alzheimer's disease that I'm very much focusing on right now, but other diseases too, like Parkinson's and other degenerative diseases. But mental health is very much in crisis today, as opposed to perhaps diseases that are related to our heart or our vessels. While it's devastating also, we've made tremendous triumphant progress in those diseases. I think cancer somewhat as well. So I think our understanding of brain is where the bottleneck is right now, in a sense that we hardly understand this complex organ that we have. We even understand how many galaxies there are out in the universe, I mean billions of them. We even know how to split our atom. Yes. I mean, the tiniest thing in the world.
But not this thing over here, right?
No.
And I want to just, I pulled a little excerpt from the preamble from the BRAIN 2025 Scientific Vision. And of course, it's quite the document to read, and an amazing one. But this really stuck with me and kind of talks to what you were just mentioning. It says, we stand on the verge of a great journey into the unknown, the interior terrain of thinking, feeling, perceiving, learning, deciding, and acting to achieve our goals. that's the special province of a human brain. And I think when you're saying, okay, we look out to the galaxy and we understand maybe more of the galaxy than what is actually in here, that's quite the thing. So you were actually, I think in your former position, you started a brain mapping initiative there. Is that right?
Well, the idea came, we were already supporting what's called neuroscience. It's the study of brain. This entire idea about having some cohesive national activity came from actually our Congress. Congress thought that we're in desperate problem in this country, not making enough progress in dealing with these brain disorders, and that they put an amendment for White House to come up with national plan to tackle this problem. It was an agenda for the nation, and that people like myself were groups of scientists who knew what might be the way to solve this problem. So to be fair, I think that neuroscience community is pretty large. I think world around over maybe 150,000 scientists. So quite many experts around the world. And also they've made slowly but steady advancement of how our brain works. Yes. But I think it this way. Suppose you have a building that has 1 million stories to go up before you understand, now we understand brain. But then these steady activities, we're taking each step, one step at a time, understanding small portion of our understanding of brain. And maybe we're in perhaps floor 55, step by step. Imagine if we have to go up to millionth floor, it will almost be impossible. So what we need is to build some sort of escalators where we could go, 2 floors at a time, or better yet, elevators.
Yes.
Not just regular elevator that can go up to 10th floor, but maybe, once in Empire State Building style, that can go up really much faster. That's a must. And it's those tools and methods that was what was lacking in brain field.
I think you once told me about when you were first doing research, a lot of it was very manual, it was very time consuming, and then you were comparing it kind of what we already can do today. It's quite the difference, right?
I know. So, that's a great example how national initiative in science made huge difference. Yeah. So Genome Project provided our capability to sequence our genes so much faster. When I was in graduate school, I sequenced one gene, took a year and a half. Just to understanding one gene. Like about 20 years later, after Genome Project, we could do that in an hour.
That's amazing.
So we put aside just, sort of stamp collecting activities, data generation, put aside, and then we were now already thinking about what does this gene do for our body? How could we understand the biology as opposed to just building up data sets? So there had been already great example where the tools made big difference. But of course, tools had been revolutionary thing for our lives anyway. Way back when, out in Africa, cheetah, if they were following us, we as human, done deal. We couldn't compete with them. But once we developed bicycle, cheetah bye-bye, right?
Changed the game.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. So many times in our history, the tools made our lives so much better. Yes. And so can research in brain, that it's the new tools and new technologies that could really change how we understand our brain. And this is actually a very timely thing to do because there are dazzling technologies that's already out there. take a look at telecommunication. There's a wireless communication that already exists. Not to mention everything that's happening in semiconductor business. I mean, oh my goodness. I mean, there are amazing opportunities coming from those sectors. Not to mention photonics, between laser and custom fiber optics. All those impressive technologies that exist elsewhere could come in, and then we can use those tools suited for, of course, brain, and then we can understand how we think, how our emotions work. This is how, using our brain, you can put together beautiful poems, or can paint amazing paintings. All these things happen because of our brain function, but we don't know how they do it.
Right.
We need to understand the basic knowledge.
So the Brain Initiative was funded in a very different way. So it actually has continuity for over 10-year period. And if I recall, the first part of it was really to do a lot of that mapping and understanding of how you might be also finding the opportunities for bringing in those new tools and other things. But we are now at that mid-year mark, and it's going to shift more into the application part of it.
I think what's most exciting thing about National Initiative is how you inspire many people who had not thought about brain, or maybe I should come in and solve brain problems. So this is just like how the moonshot, I think the project in 1960s really made so many people who never wanted to be an engineer ended up becoming an engineer. Same for Brain Initiative, that you would think that understanding brain is all about neuroscientist's job. But it turns out through Brain Initiative, we clarified, no, if you are a physicist, chemist, all kinds of different engineers, computer scientists, please come in and sit with us and let's figure out how our brain works together. And so this really mobilized great number of physical scientists and engineers to think about, oh, actually, that's true. I don't know how my brain works. I know how my heart works, but brain, that's really unknown.
Miyoung, what's interesting about what you're saying there also, so this is very much a cross-domain need. And it is, on one hand, wonderful where you're able to actually bring those domain experts together. On the other hand, as a facilitator, I know how difficult that can also be, because oftentimes we don't speak the same language. We may be thinking the very beauty of thinking differently also means that sometimes we need a translation process to be able to collaborate well with one another. And you have some experience actually facilitating some of those conversations. Tell me about some of those early conversations and then kind of how they've evolved, and also maybe your own role.
Many experts, let's say if you're a physicist compared to neuroscientists, even the word probe means very different. And so then when you gather those experts and then they're discussing we need better sensors and detectors, and then what kind of probe should we design? From neuroscientist perspective, it's one way, and then from physicist perspective, not to mention the engineers think of probe as something very different as well. So they would discuss hours and ends, and then later on they realized that they were not talking about same thing. And so it was, and to the rate that they would get very upset at each other. How could you not understand what I mean by probe?
Right.
I mean, that's just a very simple example. But other issues were also in hand, where in biology, the research so far had been done more by individual scientists having an idea, hypothesis, and solving problems. Physics in particular, let's say if you want to define dark matter, this is a big question. They built the largest telescope in the world, and thousands of scientists working together. So how they do experiment differs also.
Yes.
And brain initiative projects will have to be combining those two different cultures.
Yes.
And truth be told, even though project had gone on for over now, 5-6 years, this still is a big challenge. The Obama administration also worked really hard, especially led by then Vice President Biden, that they made a law called 21st Century Cures Act, where part of that act secures the Brain Initiative funding up to 2026. So since it began in 2013, it's over 10 years spent. And that's, I think, really very precious.
And quite extraordinary, in fact. Yeah, it doesn't happen that often. So that means that the value was there, and there's a little personal story that goes along with that, I think. I think maybe we have a couple pictures that I'd like to show you that we were able to find. This one here with our current President Biden, of course, and then we have another picture coming up here with a very interesting incident with you and President Obama. Tell us about these pictures.
Well, actually, President Obama joked with me saying, "Oh, I'm having difficult time gathering two parties to work together. And hey, Miyoung, I heard that you got 10 different parties to work together." So he was joking. But I think that my experience working with government, especially at the level of the White House, was that we as regular citizens think that we don't get up in the morning and say, "Oh, I'm going to come up with national initiative and go to the White House and then Oval Office." I mean, we don't do that.
That's not in your career plan necessarily, no.
It's not at all. But what I learned through these activities had been that actually government as high level as the White House really look for citizens' expert opinion that could change the entire country. I find that to be so remarkable, especially being an immigrant of this country. I came in 1981, so this is a very special year to me. It's a 40th anniversary.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Here's a country where immigrant myself could study hard, work hard, and then I can change my life. Additionally, if you are expert, and especially like my role where not only am I an expert, but also I'm an organizer of the different experts. And such skill set turned out to be really sought after activities of bottom-up, opinion-driven by the expert were very valued at the White House. I found that to be like a miracle, and yet it's a reality.
And it's a reality that took you initially by surprise. I think you were telling me about the story where you were in fact watching a news program and heard the announcement.
It was actually State of the Union.
State of the Union.
In February 2013. By then, I've already been working, putting together workshops, conferences of many different experts, not only in science, but also funders coming from private foundations, companies, and also in collaboration with the White House. So then they brought federal funding leaders and so on. So we've been doing multiple workshops, but the White House never really tell you that, "Oh, this is such a great idea, it's going to be national initiative." They don't. So although we've been working on over a year, we had no idea what it would become of our hard work. And then in February 2013, during State of the Union, like about 10 minutes into President's speech, he mentions that this nation needs investment in brain mapping to understand Alzheimer's. And actually I was lying down and listening like this. And then I literally jumped up, go like, "What?"
Oh my goodness.
As he just mentioned the project.
Who was the first person that you told?
Well, I was lucky that I pulled our daughter at the time, she was in high school, sitting next to me. And so she and I actually heard it together. And in fact, it's very strange that the White House sent you an email immediately after President speaks of your project.
But it was after.
Of course,
Okay.
they don't tell
Yes,
you
yeah,
early.
okay.
So President is still talking.
Right.
And then you get an email saying, congratulations, you just made the State of the Union.
What an incredible story.
It was a wonderful experience.
Absolutely.
And I understand that if it was mentioned in State of the Union, usually government really follows up on those activities.
And this is really a bipartisan initiative. So it isn't just Obama's administration, but it has continued and with great support, I think, all the way to the top.
I think 95% of senators voted yes.
Yes.
And 95% in lower house as well. So these are not, I remember that even Senator Ted Cruz wrote an essay in Dallas Morning, saying how proud he is about this. And Mitch McConnell also mentioned that this is one of the most important and critical bill that we passed in Senate. So even though it was led by Vice President Biden. So I think that some things that are really related, I think health issues and so on, it's not a partisan issue. It's all our issues. Everyone has their mothers or wives or husbands and so on who has had terrible diseases in the past. So I think this is one of the issues that we can really unite all of us.
Absolutely, and I'm so, you know my background as well. I'm a ruptured brain aneurysm survivor, and it nearly took my life away and had a huge impact also, of course, on my immediate family, my two sons, and really altered our outlook in life. But one of the things that in fact got me to first understand more about the Brain Initiative was the fact that once I had recovered enough to have energy, I really went to work to look for information. Because I felt that it was amazing at this time and age that no one could really tell me what causes a brain aneurysm for sure. Now, there are genetic factors. We know things about smoking and those kinds of things.
Story.
Yeah, and those things that we did say, people were saying, well, if this and this and this is true, none of those applied to me. It's like, well, this is strange. And of course, I work with life sciences companies, so I like you, I know the technologies are there, I know the science is there, but something's missing. And that led me to really say, what do we know about the brain? And it did amazed me actually how little that was. I was delighted when I found the initiative. What have we learned? Do we now know more than we did 5 years ago?
Absolutely, yes. This is what happens when we put concerted effort, not only by funding, but also we human can do so much more and better if we align our thinking together and mobilize talents and funds together. So in this case, for example, we talk so much about in our brain how many neurons there are, how they are connected, and how they work together. But at the end of the day, we had no idea how many different cell types are in our brain. Well, we still don't know the absolute answer, but we thought maybe tens of different cell types. Through Brain Initiative, with new tools and methods, we are now learning. Just, I think one of the most recent paper that came out showed in one snapshot a very tiny portion of our brain has 350 plus different cell types are working all together. What? I mean, we just did not realize. No wonder our brain works so complex manner. These are kinds of, in certain ways, parts list. We are gathering more fundamental basic understanding of what's in it in our brain for the first time. This is very surprising, and yet it didn't happen before, and now it's happening. Such projects are going to be, of course, ongoing, and new tools and methods are being developed. In the past, for example, we understood how brain was working together. We call it brain activity, with maybe 100 neurons or even at the maximum 1,000 neurons. Okay, we have billions of neurons in our brain, so how can you understand how 100 neurons are working together? I mean, it's like, can you see the entire movie by looking at the pinhole?
Right.
You can't. It's similar situation. Now we can actually measure brain activities at 10,000, even 100,000 level. So we've accomplished tremendously, building up basic sort of parts lists, just getting more information. Understanding those alone is not sufficient. We want to really help us. I mean,
Yes.
after all,
Yeah.
we're Americans, it's all about me. I love that. So let me just give you a couple examples. I talked about earlier, how do we employ what telecommunication technology of wireless technology, how could we use it? So for example, for Parkinson's patients, deep in our brain, they could put some element so then you would stop your shaking, for example. But often these can happen by having huge machinery behind you and so on. You would want those things, tools and methods to happen just at home easily.
Yes.
But through using wireless technology, this is feasible now. There are examples of technology development that you could now not have huge machinery behind you, but perhaps you could just move around at home and so on. So these are a great example. It will take longer time for every patient to use such opportunities.
Yes. So I'm curious now, since this initiative actually did a lot of the research part has been done in a very different, very collaborative manner. Now, working in life sciences, of course, at some point, science meets business, right? And business also means we need to have the patents, that we also have to have our products. How do you see that transition from the research to come to play in actual innovation of new products? How will that work? And do we already have some examples?
I have two answers for your question, and that's a very important one, and that is having spectacular research doesn't help.
Yes.
If it's not going to be utilized for 330 million Americans, right? And so it will be very critical how you take those amazing scientific discoveries into something that will be tangible and be helpful for everyone. So the problem is, among all these new technologies that's been developed now for building up more data in science, which one's going to be really useful for people? Right. So do we wait another decade before we make companies to figure out? Or do we just test them out all at once, as many as possible, multiple shots on goal? They decided to go for multiple shots on goal to the rate that under Brain Initiative funding, they're training these scientists who developed these tools to think about how do you go from lab, using it to, let's say, animal models and so on, into now perhaps using it to human. Yep. Teaching them how to build business model and so on and so forth. So there's I think 6 weeks workshop this summer. And so ton of graduate students were taking those courses and so on. So there's clear movement in this particular initiative that we don't want the discovery stays on its own And then let's wait until venture companies come in and see which one's going to be actually useful for human. We want to go through these in-between value-added activities from the innovators before investors could really come in and say, okay.
So in a sense, we creating a little bit of an agile development mode where we do these iterations and we learn along the way. And through that learning, we will hopefully hone in on those things that have the most viability to be able to be implemented. An amazing journey. I want to switch gears just a little bit here because some of the things that you've talked about in your own involvement, clearly you are driven by a passion that comes from inside, but you have taken on in many ways what I would describe as mission impossible in the beginning, which has, and now we see actually that it is possible to be much more, something that we didn't even imagine possible perhaps 10 years ago. What drove you to do that? What gave you the courage to take on something that magnificent? Knowing that you're also the mother and the daughter and the grandmother and the wife, and you have all these other things in your life, because it appears that it's not about a job. It's about something much bigger than that.
Oh, it's something that I didn't think about, but I do have this stubborn optimism of immigrants.
Stubborn optimism of immigrants. Of course, we are both immigrants. I can relate to that. And here I thought I was the only stubborn person here. Thank you.
I think that I feel as though I did really overcome very hard, mission impossible kind of situation. Being I think, woman scientist and also keeping up with senior executive level as, again, woman minority scientist had not been an easy path. I think that what got me going in this case is that, when I came to this country in particular, I was 21, 21 becoming 22. And I never imagined that if I work hard and believe in something that I could do something. But I think I could be a good example that this is a country that makes that possible. I think that really plays underlying role a lot in the kind of things that I do. I'm going to be audacious and just dream high, why not? But others are much more pragmatic indications. So for example, when I was doing workshops and conferences and so on, building up the idea of the BRAIN initiative, there were tremendous numbers of very famous scientists, Nobel Prize winners, and many scientists who never knew each other, but coming to my workshops. And I noticed in due course, they weren't even wanting reimbursement. They were paying their ways to come to our meetings and really involving themselves, participating, discussing, and so on. Even if we begin the meeting like 7:30 in the morning, we will provide them breakfast and all the rest. And then 10 o'clock, they go to bar and still talking about this project. Gave me a clear indication. This is actually a fun project. This is a project that's necessary, right? Other things are like we would have a representative from the White House. In particular, he was the Deputy Director of Office of Science, Technology and Policy, OSTP, Tom Khalil. Very well-known person, quite important position, influencer. Everyone knew about how he makes things happen. And we also noticed that he would show up every single time. And also, he would also go to, after 10 o'clock and still talking to scientists. Those were great indication from an organizer's perspective that, this has a momentum. It's gaining some concept Otherwise, why would they do that?
Right.
These are very busy people. Many, they are very responsible on many other things. And so I think that I'm both very, conceptual about, I want to make things happen, but not in a blind alley. I think that I find good group of people who can make things happen, and I see their enthusiasm, and that's what got me going.
Was it important to be a scientist to be able to organize this? In other words, that credibility of having the science understanding and background yourself and being recognized as a scientist, did that help you in the process?
I mean, in my case, it did, but I see something different. When it comes to making some large effort, you just use everything that you have into your advantage, even your disadvantageous situation into your advantage. So I'll give you an example. I think that because I wasn't well known in Washington, D.C., when I was pulling these things together, especially people who were in Washington, when they came, people from FDA or federal funding organizations and their leaders, they go like, who is she? And in certain ways, they did not give me perhaps credit maybe I deserve, and underestimating it's just not going to happen because she doesn't have enough influence to make it happen. But sometimes I think that I use really that as my advantage because then I could bring complete outsider's perspective in. Another thing is that gave me enough time to build ideas up. If I was already a well-known person, they had an expectation for me to deliver something right away.
Yes.
But because I wasn't, and they weren't expecting anything out of me, because it was very heterogeneous voices from different experts, different opinions. I myself was very confused as to what should be the singular idea that we make this as a national initiative. I was very confused myself. And because I was unknown, I had time to, mull over. I could digest everything I heard, reconnect everything, and eventually I think the idea that became a national initiative was concrete, clear, and decisive. So I think that, suppose I wasn't a scientist, I think that because of them, maybe I was disadvantaged, but then I could bring, maybe I was more personable, perhaps. I was, maybe I had other skill set that I could bring in front and center and make this possible. So I would like to encourage everyone who might be listening. You have a passion, you want to make something happen. Don't worry about what you don't have. Use all you have. Even when other people say, that's not really best of you, even use that. And then pull things together. I think that many of people who were involved in this endeavor always told me that I was the shepherd of this project, meaning I wasn't the leader who took the torch and looked back and said, hello everyone, follow me. It was never like that. I was more standing in the back, looking at all of the right experts, clarifying their thoughts, and then having them not steer away wrong direction, that I remind them, no, our goal is over there.
So that goal was really important to keep. It's kind of the North Star, that there is the star. Do you consider yourself an influencer?
So I think back about that kind of concept into my family life.
Yes.
I think that, sometimes Asian mothers are known to be tiger mom. They're pushing their kids to study and so on. I think my style is just a bit different. I'm not front and center influencer. Yes. I'm more a person who's really supporting what they want to do. Yes. So if that's an influence, I think it is. but it's a very different way of influencing.
Sounds like empowerment also. A lot of empowerment, kind of really helping people to be able to, in some cases, maybe find their own voice in a different context even, which is so hard. Which is so hard sometimes, and certainly in the, also in, you know, depending on the culture within which we operate on a daily basis. And this is why I find this so fascinating, this conversation, because of course in life sciences companies, innovation hinges on the ability to bring the different voices and perspectives together, and to really be able to not just bring them together so that, you know, on a basic level, but to bring them together to be able to advance to a whole totally different level of thinking. And this is what we are looking. Now, maybe the Brain Initiative will tell us how we get to a different level of thinking. But right now, it's really about those dynamics and how to facilitate that dance of the dynamics and still keep that goal clear.
So I think that that's a very important aspect of our conversation, because, you know, perhaps in the past, in the history, that leaders and influencers were more on top. The society today is such that to make a lot of things to move forward, it's about, as you mentioned, combining many different experts. And you don't want the fringe of experts, you want the true expert who's really well known or who's really making differences. But in general, they tend to be not listening to others and so on and so forth. And so, but how do you composite all those great ideas into one?
Yes.
And in that scenario, you do not want a leader who's top down. You want a leader who's aligning everyone,
Yeah.
inclusive.
Right.
And in that perspective, I just wonder if we women are maybe natural leader in that way today in 21st century and maybe moving forward. Because what's natural to us may be the kind of leaders who could make things happen more down the road.
This is something that certainly I hear a lot of women leaders discuss, and how do they sort of make their own, well, I'm going to use the word agenda since this is a leader's agenda, right? So how do you really make an agenda possible? And I think, you know, for me, one of the reasons why I call it the podcast Leader's Agenda is actually precisely what you were saying, not to think about agenda anymore the same way as we may have, but really on how do you create the conditions for the agenda to emerge in a very different way. That emerging also came through in what you described earlier on what you said, you turned something that might have been a hindrance to an advantage. You were able to take some time to let these different things to really come together, to make sense of it. And that sense making, particularly I think sometimes in this culture, we are so results focused. We have to kind of get there very fast, just do it. We forget that not everything can be just done like that. The most challenging dilemmas that we are facing, whether that's in science or in everyday life sometimes, they require us to have that reflection. And collective reflection is amazing.
It really is, in a sense that I think that if you as a leader thought about this specific issue that you want to work on for a long time, and then if you think that you on your own have, let's say, even 75% solutions, perhaps that may not be the best solution there is. You might want to be reflective and then gather more information. You will be so surprised how great minds, when they get together, might be a bit chaotic at first, but how, like you said, the emergent idea at the end is so much more.
I would love to actually talk a little more about also your current journey on the Alzheimer's side. We may have to ask you to come back for a deeper conversation on that. But just in a couple words, what's next for you?
I think that because I was in different sectors, I learned a lot of different ways of getting things done, not only academia, industry, and philanthropy. Now that I've done a lot of work with government combined, my next journey became much more purposeful. It's so interesting. You know, if you want to sort of find a way to have your activities to have a big impact, in my mind, there are three things that you want to really think about. One is what problem you want to solve. The other is, to me, in certain ways, most important thing, whom would you like to work with? And then the last, if you do well with first and second, how will you solve that problem? Hopefully, this podcast will be viewed by younger people, and then maybe this could be useful tool for them. You know, in my mind, deciding what you want to work on is the time that's most precious, because this is what you can decide.
Yes.
You don't have to worry about what other people think and so on. This is the perhaps only time that it's up to you to decide what you want. But in my mind, at least if I could give an advice, you know, unfortunately, the world is full of many problems.
Yes. So how do you pick the one?
Yeah. So how do you pick the one? So you have to come up with some categories of things that you care. I care a lot about a problem that everyone knows already. That it's not a surprise if I say, oh, you know, I want to solve Alzheimer's problem. Someone will say, that's not a problem. I mean, you will never meet someone like that. But do you care about 8 billion people or, you know, 330 million Americans? Usually I care a lot about 550 Americans.
Yes.
What do you think that number stands for?
What does it stand for?
It's the number of our representative.
Because there is some influence coming down right from there. Okay.
Because many times, if it's a big problem, you also need effort throughout the nation.
Yes.
You also need a bit of big pocket.
Yes.
And our government, of course, has those too.
Do you have a hope?
Not only hope, I am going to purposefully do activities to make sure that our chances to find prevention, treatment, I mean, I think cure for Alzheimer's is tough act, but the things that will concretely help people getting Alzheimer's delayed, other things are to make sure that Alzheimer's patients have their independence longer,
Yes.
Or caregivers' burden will be less, or taxpayers' pay will be less. Those are concrete things I think that we can change now if we work together. And I put together lots of conferences and workshops, and we think that we learned some activities we could initiate that could make those outcomes possible in very foreseeable time. I'll give you one example. We are very interested in bringing in technologies that exist to come in and help those activities to be possible. So that's why I'm at MIT now, and we think that we have ideas that's gonna make a difference.
Excellent. And I love the way you just brighten up as you talk about it, which in and of itself already inspires me to want to know more. I hope that we have another chance to talk a little more about that. And thank you so much for this great conversation. There are a lot of different nuggets for just leadership wisdom here, and we'll be pulling some of those out of this and perhaps also continuing on that conversation as we go forward.
Well, Tarja, thank you so much for having me today.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Leaders Agenda podcast. You can continue the conversation with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter by following Action for Results.